Right, well, I'll put you all at ease. We haven't all died. There is going to be a continuation of these videos. Last week ended up being, oh, you know what, I'm going to do some multitasking. I fell into this trap of not doing this last time, didn't I? Last week, two reasons. Myself and Nat were away on a little weekend walking trip with our dad, and then Jamie, the man behind the camera, was going to Rally Legend. And if there's ever a better reason to not do a video, Rally Legend has to be it. Having seen the videos of what he experienced during the weekend, I think I'm going to be going next year as well. So that's why there wasn't a video last week, even though I think that's actually the first time we've not done one in about 2 years. So I'm amazed we've managed that long, to be honest. However, consequently, we've got loads to talk about this week. I'm just going to start with the brew. Now, what I have been meaning to mention previously and failing dismally, as you've probably seen recently, the coffee machine and our coffee is now supplied by Roundstone Coffee, and we have a discount code. So if you go onto their website, onto their shop, and use the discount code RP15, you will get a discount on your coffee. And you too can drink excessive amounts of coffee like us. So, let's see what we've been up to. I'm going to start with E-Type. I think there's only a small amount on this. So we got the rack mounts back from machining. They then went for anodising and have come back from anodising as well, so they're ready to be bolted on now. And George finished all the plasma cutting of the crescents, as shall we say, to do the sort of exoskeleton we're going to do on the bonnet, to model that ready for the carbon moulding process. That's all we've got, sort of the only movement on that at the moment, but there will be more movement in terms of the bonnet construction soon. Morris has been one of major progress, which I think we'll continue to do. So I'll start with some of the smaller things. James has been on with the door cards and the rear quarter cards. So rear quarter cards I think are done now. The main door cards, the materials just arrived for those, but he's already done the templates a while ago. And we were working up to completing them because we needed to do the arm rests. I'll see if I can open this door. Of course, I'll immediately fail dismally at this. There we go. So George had done an armrest design, which we wanted to trial in the car. He'd done a 3D print, but it was essentially waiting for me to get one of the seats in the car, sit in it, and make sure I was happy with the position. Basically, when you reach out, that it's comfortable. When you pull it in, it's in a sensible position, doesn't dig into your leg too much, doesn't interrupt with where the door release handle is, and that all sits nicely together. So we did a few tweaks, completely happy with the design now. So we've 3D printed the final items actually. And then James has done the mounting points for these. So the technique we've used for those, which we've done on a few things, to create a mounting system where you can't see any of the fasteners, is that the mounting bolt holes actually go in underneath here. And then they go into bosses that are welded onto metal plates at an angle. And they kind of sit into counterbores on the back of the handle. And then the metal plates themselves are then bolted onto the door with bolts that are behind here that sit into little counterbores, and the heads of which sit into counterbores in the back of the handle itself. So when you see it all in situ, you can't see any visible fasteners. But what it actually is they're in an angle under here. You undo those, take that off, and then the bolts that hold the plate to the door are underneath the handle. So that's looking really good, and that was the last bit that we needed to do before we could finish the door cards. So we're in a position now actually to finish the door cards, and then I think we've got everything we need then in terms of leathering and upholstery for the rest of the interior. Front door cards, rear quarter cards, the bulkhead panel which Rich has done a little while ago. I think James is just starting some work on the rear boot trim panels as well, but we'll get all of the front stuff done first. You'll notice the centre console's just sitting in there with some switches and controls in it now. I've done the sub-loom, as I'd call it, wiring to the 4 switches in the console at the top there. So that's the little bit of loom to go from the switches to the connector that Max put on the loom when he built that. And then I've got to do another little sub-loom or pair of for the electric window switches. But the fact that we were doing those probably suggests to you that we were at the point where we could test the electrics. So last week I think it was, we did our first full electrical power up. I did the I wrote basically the maps for the PDMs. They're the calibrations, if you like, that you upload to the PDM to tell it what outputs to turn on according to what inputs are live. I'll perhaps go into that in a bit more detail another day, but we've done those calibrations, uploaded them to the PDMs, connected the power up for the first time, and was pretty successful as first electrical power-ups go. I don't think we've ever done one where everything has worked first time exactly as it should. But as they go, I would say it was very good. And then I started doing a little bit further detailed programming. So things like the timers, so all the buttons on the console are momentary switches, and they're on timers for things like the heated screens. And then the illumination. So when we designed the loom, we had separate outputs from the PDM for the telltales in the switches. So for instance, on the heated screen, you press the switch, it's a momentary switch, the switch lights up. It then starts a timer, which times the screen for, I think I've set it to 5 minutes. So then after 5 minutes, it kicks back out and the light on the telltale on the button comes back off. So little details like that on the programming. And then very quickly from that, we were at the point where we could start it, because we'd already we'd manually primed up the fuel pump, set the fuel pressure, leak checked that, all the other fluids are in. In fact, one of the other jobs that John was on last week, we'd just received the radiator in the last video, I think, and John's gone ahead and made the bottom hose, so that's like an aluminium fabricated hose that brackets onto the radiator, finished the rest of the coolant plumbing, got all that in situ. That allowed him to get the coolant in. He's also done, and I don't know whether he'd done this last week, but the brake system is now filled and bled and the brakes are working, same with the clutch. And the culmination of all those fluids being in place and everything being ready, and the electrical systems being ready to power up, is that we were able to fire it up for the first time. So that was a case of powering up the ECU for the first time. It's already been dynoed and had the map it was dynoed on, so we were already theoretically almost all the way there with that. And again, that went remarkably event-free. John turned it over without the plugs in first to prime it and get oil pressure. And then, yeah, literally first crack, it was just straight up. The throttle bodies were perfectly in balance. It sat at a nice idle and it just sat there nice. So couldn't really ask for more in terms of the first fire up. Sounds really good too, not too loud. Nice noise, but not too resonant in the exhaust. Feels good in terms of vibration transmission into the body. It felt good, just as much as you can tell with it just sat there running. So yeah, really excited to push this forward now. We're pretty much just in tying up bits of interior. We can get the rest of the dash in now. I'm just going to do a test of the aircon system, get that gassed and tested and leak checked, so we don't have any leaks behind the dash where it goes into the evaporator. And then we can start buttoning up the interior and getting that lot in. So very, very exciting times. Stratos, we are really nearing the end on that. So I think last time we just successfully got our IVA certificate, so we've sent off for the registration on that, which hasn't yet come through but should be any day soon. And then we've been going through a variety of jobs that were remaining. One of them is spanner checking everything, so we have what we call a vehicle safety check sheet. It's basically a list sheet with any safety critical fastener listed on there, and it gets checked and ticked off by two separate people, paint marked, and all those fasteners and paint marks photographed, and that's all ticked off on a sheet. So I think Adam and the two Adams actually have been going through that on this. And then I've been tackling various little niggly jobs that have just been outstanding on it. So for instance, where the window sliders go up, when we changed to the glass windows, we had to make an edit on those. But I only had some very thin aluminium to hand, and we needed that in for the IVA. I didn't have a chance to get the stuff off to the anodizers and back, so we've done a thicker version of those now. We've got the material, had them anodized, put them in. They're the sort of sections that the window raising knob runs through the slot in. So we've got the anodized ones are now in. I've been through the door locks and there were some missing link rods on those. We've had the latches in for yonks, and doors have been opening and closing no problem, but we'd never actually tested the locks and realised there was a linkage between the lock mechanism and the latch that needed finishing, so they're in. And then just finishing off details on the seals. There's all sorts of little awkward things that don't quite look as you'd like them to look on these kits. So things like the top of this door, I didn't really like the exposed look, so we've made some little rubber sort of gaskets almost that sit on there and finish that off and butt up with the seal on the outside. sorting these kind of waste belt seals, as you'd call them, on the inside here that sit on the door card, getting something like a felt seal. It's just getting good solutions to all of those little slightly unfinished areas that wouldn't really be a problem on a track car, but don't really look great on a road car. So happy with all that now. Door cards have gone in for the final time. All the sealing systems are looking good. We've got the stereo back in. Reverted back to the intended steering wheel. I've just got this column shroud back from flocking actually today, so that's ready to go in. And then the clamshells, I mentioned we'd taken the rear one off. We were enlarging the hole around the fuel filler, and there was a couple of little issues where the spoiler holes had been deleted. There was a little bit of sinkage in the primer, so we could just see it. You could probably flat it out, but it all stacked up to we might as well repaint it. So that's been painted, and then the front one we're doing at the same time. I can't remember if I mentioned, but there was a cracking issue on that. If you actually look at the shape of that front clam, sort of at the centre of the wheel arch, there's no depth to the shape at all. It's almost just like a flat piece, and the only thing that stops it folding in half at that point is the thickness of the wheel arch lip. And sure enough, one side had actually cracked. So identifying that as a weak point, we decided to roll up some stainless steel bars, bond them into the back of the arch lip, and then re-prep and paint that as well. Made sense while we were doing one just to get them both done. So that's just, I think the guys have painted them now. They're just flattening and polishing the paint finish. They'll be back through here, hopefully later today. We're going to do some gas struts on the front clam to make that a little bit easier to open and also further eliminate the possibility of cracking, because the tendency is you lift it from the back edge and that's when it tries to sort of bend the whole front in half. So we figure if we put gas struts in low down where the Trek straps normally are, it means that you don't really have to lift it. It'll be kind of lifting itself. You might have a bit of downward pressure on that. But that's only then compressing that arch lip rather than trying to pull it apart. So that's where we're at with that. Other details on this, I'm just trying to think now. Oh, the rear window. So as soon as the rear clam's on, I'm going to refit that silver louver panel, the custom louver panel that we made. And I've got to do the glass window bonding on that. So I've just been prepping for that. We wanted to do a black band around the glass so it hides the bonding sealant. So I've just masked out that, sprayed direct glazing primer on it on the reverse face, which then just looks like a nice black sort of OEM style band around it from the outside. So that's ready to go on. And then we are exceedingly close at that point. We're kind of into those minor details. We've still got to commission the aircon on it. And as soon as we get the registration through, I'm going to do some road miles on it and maybe do a few refinements to the map on it. Idle control needs a little bit of further work, but we are extremely close on that one. And talking of extremely close, I mean, this is, I think, ready for me tomorrow to go and do a road test in it. Again, we've been going through the spanner check, final sort of check sheets on it. We noticed another thing, which was the alternators, an external amplified type, which we didn't realise before because that came with the engine. We'd wired it as per an internally regulated alternator. Actually, it's an external regulator type, and it made most sense just to get the matching external regulator. So we've put that on because it was overcharging. Put that on, that's all sorted. I think James was just finishing off his front sort of infill panel, the last video showed, which is all done and looking great. Rich made some trim panels for the side of the boot area, which was the final piece of the puzzle in there before we could get all the carpet set made for the back of that. So yeah, we're basically up to test drive. As soon as I'm happy with that, well, any rectifications or work that arises as a result of test drive, and then we're going to strip and refinish the wheels in a more appealing way. George has designed some new centre caps for these wheels. Eventually, we were going to change the wheels, and actually eventually we went all around the houses trying to work out what wheels to use, and actually decided that these ones, in terms of the widths, offsets and style, are almost exactly what we want. I'm just not very happy with the finish on them in terms of that diamond cut finish across the spokes, and they need refurbishing anyway. So we're going to do like a matte sort of almost magnesium type finish, like a matte grey finish on the centre, and only diamond cut the actual outer lip, which I think will transform them, and then do some normal caps rather than those sort of faux knock-on spinners on the centres. So yeah, next week should be driving, seeing what's necessary as a result of that. The Manta, few little steps on this. We've been waiting to get the gearbox out and sent away because it was supplied by the owner supposedly as a rebuilt gearbox, but when we went to fill the oil on it, we undid the plug and it just came out because it had been chemical metalled in place, and we couldn't get in to tap the threads with it in situ. So we've had the gearbox out, and because that raised question marks about the quality of the rebuild on it, we've sent the gearbox away with a replacement casing with good threads in it to be properly rebuilt. So that's happening at the minute, and then we've received the prop shaft for this. That was made up by Dave Mack Props to Bobby's drawing. Hopefully it fits. Obviously we can't check until we've got the gearbox back, but yeah, next steps on this are, as soon as the gearbox is back, get that in, get the prop shaft in, and then really excitingly, the wheel castings, the centres for the split rim wheels we're doing for it have arrived. So we're just going to do a few checks on those, make sure we're happy with all the dimensions, then get the PCD wheel bolt holes machined in them and all the split rim attachment bolts holes machined. Then we'll be ready to prep and paint the centres and get those on, and that is a huge step that I can't wait to see on this car, because it's been lying around with these horrible wheels on it for God knows how long now. So it'll just really transform it to get those wheels on. So looking forward to that. Land Cruiser, couple of avenues of progress. John's been on with the fuel system, so we designed these little billet sort of hatches in the tanks that had in-tank high pressure pump in one, and then a lift for a Venturi pump in the other. So he's been fitting those for the final time, made up some mounts for the Venturi pump. He's just in the process of laying out all the plumbing for that, so we can get all of that lot in situ, but hopefully, he's actually off sick today, but hopefully in the next few days, fuel system there will be finished. And then James has just been working on some of the details of the front seat frames. So I think everything was mocked up during the metalwork stage. We've got, you know, all the custom-made seat frames done. There's just some details to do with the fasteners and the way the latching mechanisms that need checking over and refining. I think he's machining some parts for that, but we'll show some more of that next week. So it's just, we're kind of down to a slow simmer on this one at the minute, although one thing that is exciting that's arrived this week is the leather. So, well, I say the leather, some of the leather. We've had the long wait on the leather is because we've had a company make us this kind of woven leather where they strip the leather into 7mm wide strips, weave it all together, laminate it onto a backing to give this kind of basket weave look. And we've had that on order for quite a long while. Now that's arrived, however, it was dispatched with some plain hides of the same colour, which was to do the side bolsters, and one of the two packages has gone missing. So we're just waiting for word from UPS on where exactly the rest of that leather's got to. But as soon as that's here, we can then get the seat upholstery in progress. So yeah, oh, and the radiator, I've seen that is in progress at Concept Racing, so next week I think we'll have the radiator through as well. And I think only one last detail was on Kaiser, the machine surround for the screen and the keypads that are going to go in the dash came through, and we've also finished the prep work on the dash fascia panels and all the other wood components from the dash and around the windscreen. They've now gone away to Wicked Coatings to do the hydro dipping on those, so hopefully everything will fall into place with that in the next week or so as well. We'll get those back from Wicked Coatings, do a mock-up build on the dash. Going to make a bit of a decision at that point on whether we do the screen surround polished or black, and I'm not sure until I see it in situ and sort of run that past the owner. But then we'll be able to finish that revised dash on Kaiser as well. So a lot of things all coming together at the same time. And a lot of progress next door as well. So this is going to be one bumper long episode. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Nat. I'm going to mention just before I do, mugs are available in the shop. Also now drinks bottles, like double walled stainless steel, I think they're 600ml drinks bottles that will keep a drink cold or warm because they're insulated. So yeah, go and check them out, and over to Nat for the second half.
That is me filming whenever you are ready.
Well, hello folks, and here we are in the fabrication side. Thanks to Cal for the little handover, and we're going to start with the second Mark 1 Escort, Project Kuma. which Tom is working on right now because we're filming at a slightly funny time of day this time. We're filming in the morning because we're about to start the blaster up and decided that filming prior to starting the blaster might be a good idea because otherwise you wouldn't be able to hear me say anything. That might be beneficial, might not be beneficial. So Tom's using the old spot welder actually here because we don't have any tips for the nice new spot welder, well, new to us spot welder, that'll actually get in the corners of the flange. Some of the flanges on this rear panel are quite difficult to access, so he's using the old spot welder to pop this one in, which it puts much less tip pressure on, it's got a lot less power. However, for a pair of thin panels like these going together, it's actually got plenty enough power to do the job. Of course, he's found the bit that doesn't conduct while it's live on camera. He's found a bit with where there was a bit of something on the back of the old flange. But yeah, that explains where we're at really on that. He's just been doing the reshaping on the new rear panel because they're reasonable, but they're not quite crisp enough. It's from Magnum panels. They're pretty good, but they're not. The flanges down here are not perfect, and the light apertures are not quite right, and the curve on these areas isn't quite right. There's a few bits that needs a bit of tweaking, but it is only tweaking. It's not like remaking the panel. It is only tweaking, so it's not too bad. So yeah, he's got that all done and done some little repairs and bits around there. Then prior to that, he was working on getting the rear scuttle on. That's a new rear scuttle again from Magnum Panels. Again, needs a bit of tweaking. We might have to do a few tweaks on that. The curvature on that's not quite right. But this car had already had a scuttle replacement in the past, and it had had a panel put on, I believe, that had come from Express Panels, I think, and they don't cut out the grills in the back. They're pressed, but not then cut out, and I think they leave that for the person fitting it to cut out, which isn't a particularly fun job. And it had also been fairly badly fitted. It was about the only repair. That and the front wings were the only bits of this car that had been repaired. But that needed repairing and it needed sorting out properly, so we cut that off, and as well we did, because the metalwork underneath the ends of it had sort of been hacked brutally with a grinder and was a bit of a state. So Rich took the scuttle off a couple of weeks back. Tom's done the repairs under the ends then to make this tidy underneath the ends of there, and then fitted the new rear scuttle. And so now he's just getting through the process of, he's done the reshaping and the alignment and everything. As you can see by the sort of, we've got a ratcheting porta power, if you like, a ratchet pusher or a ratchet puller, quite a handy tool actually that's across there. Stu's, it's basically ratchet, it's like a giant quick action clamp basically, and we can use that to push or pull panels to position. At the moment that's just putting some pressure, not a lot, but just putting a bit of pressure on the quarter panels just to keep them out while we get the flanges clamped and spot welded, because the quarters had both pulled in a bit. I think as a result of the work that had been done on the past on there, the gaps were tapered to the boot lid. So we've pushed them back slightly past where they need to be while we weld it, so that then when we're all done, they'll just spring back slightly, and then the gaps should be pretty much bang on parallel. That's what we're hoping. We've sort of pushed them like a millimetre past where they need to be. That should mean that they're about bang on when the pressure's off and everything's spot welded. Everything should be lined up. So that's where we're at that end. Moving on, Rich has done a few bits in here. He's got the seat boxes out. He's cut the tunnel out, and then self-tapping screwed the big gearbox tunnel section into place, just so that's all held in. Got all that ready, so that's all ready to go. And then Scott's been working on the front end. He's got the bulkhead all cleaned up and just finished off a few bits of fettling there. Got a bit of alignment done. Sorry, I'm standing in a bad place for Jamie to get me here. Yeah, he's done a bit of alignment, worked a few things out, got the inner wings squared up and straightened up and pulled the flanges around a bit and got everything to fit. And then got them bolted to the jig legs, got everything bolted into place so everything lines up, check the alignment, check that these are the correct separation, check that the heights are correct, done all the basic checks on everything, and then they're basically ready to weld in, which he's started doing. He's plug welded down the bulkhead, because on this car, because we're not taking this scuttle top panel off, you can't actually get in with the spot welder to weld the inner wing back flange, the flange here to the bulkhead here. We haven't got any arms for the welder that will go all the way around or reach in through the heater bubble space, so they're being plug welded down there, and there's a few other bits going to be plug welded. Then we'll spot weld down the chassis rails, and then we'll stitch weld everywhere else. So yeah, that's pretty much where that's at. This is again progressing in the background. You'll notice that you will notice in a minute that the other car isn't here. Project 1, the first Mark 1 Escort of the pair, that's gone to Simpson Race Exhausts, so that's over there now, and they're actually going to build 2 manifolds and 2 exhaust systems on the same car. Build one, then take it off, and then build another one, take it off. So that we've got the systems done, because the body shells are going to be identical. They're doing that so that we've got them for both cars done from one. As I say, all of the metal parts that we put into the floor and all the parts to accommodate the rear suspension, all the parts that make them not a Mark 1 Escort anymore, pretty much, are all done. They're all drawn in CAD, so they should all be identical. All the parts will be patterned and CNC cut the same for both cars, so there should be very little to no variation between the cars. So the exhaust systems and manifolds should, famous last words, be a direct fit between the two. So that's where we're at with that. I'll tell you what, sorry, I'm going to stop Jamie there. I mean, what I will say, before it went to, I need to rewind a little bit, I've missed a bit here. Before that went to Simpson Exhausts, there was obviously a little bit of a rush on to get a few tasks finished up that needed doing before the car went, which were the gearbox crossmember needed doing. With a bit of urgency, because the exhaust is always, anybody that's built a rear-wheel drive car will know that the gearbox mounting is usually a thing that's fairly tight on the exhaust system somewhere along the line, and it is on those. Sometimes I'd run the exhaust system under the gearbox mounting, and sometimes I'd run it over the gearbox mounting. On these Escorts, I'm actually running it above the gearbox mounting, and the gearbox mounting, I've actually got one so I can show you. Here's one I made earlier. This was the first sort of prototype one. It's made from, it's 3mm hot rolled actually, because I had a piece of hot rolled which I was going to use for the prototype bit. It's 3mm hot rolled, CNC plasmid and folded, nothing particularly technical. It's basically a folded channel with the aperture for the gearbox mount, hole there to give you access to do the bolt up that actually holds it to the gearbox, and then 2 holes there to bolt the mounting into the channel, and the 2 holes each end there and there, which allow it to bolt up to 2 short chassis rails which we fabricated that go between the main chassis rails on the Escort. I think I've actually got some blanks. If you wait there a minute, I think I've actually got somewhere, here we are. Some blanks for some actual folded sections for they're the actual rail pieces we made. They basically weld to the side of the original chassis rail, and then the gearbox crossmember, it probably won't because that was one of the, oh, it will actually, that goes over them. And then these have crush tubes welded in. There's crush tubes welded in there, and there, a piece of seamless tube welded in from the inside into there. And the gearbox crossmember goes up like that, bolts through there, and so that joins up to the other one of those, that side. So the whole lot's tied together, tied into the chassis rails, carries the gearbox, and then there's a nice cutout there for the exhaust system to go through. That'll be welded in. There'll be some 2mm sheet welded into that piece to just reinforce that shallow section, because that's got to be cut out more. On the final version, that's cut out down to more or less where that line is, and then that's sheeted in 2mm just to give the strength back to that piece that's reduced down. So that's how the gearbox crossmember worked on that. We've also got the seat mountings done. I'm trying to think what else we were working on that. Jamie's going to tell me now. Yes, sorry, yes, I'd forgotten the bit Scott was working on, yes. A couple of parts in the front, finishing off the front panel, getting all that sorted out, getting that, the very last parts of that finished. Scott had got nearly all of it done, but he needed the final welding doing on that. And then also the strut brace, because that can come quite close to the exhaust manifold. So he made all the parts up for the strut brace, got those fitted. Again, we drew them on CAD, CNC cut the parts, rolled the tubes, cut the flanges, TIG welded the tubes, that's like a tapered tube that carries the strut brace. TIG welded those to the flanges, then TIG welded the shear plates on, made the used ovalized tubing, 15 by 30 oval, 16 gauge tube, with crush tubes TIG welded into the ends of it, then all of that lot bolted together, and that made up the strut brace. And then also finished off the installation of the mock-up plastic 3D printed dry sump tank So that, again, it gives us the right sort of space for Matt Simpson to build the exhaust, and also fitted the alternator. It won't be the final alternator, but fitted the alternator that's going on that we've got for it. And also Rich made like a dummy starter motor. We can't actually fit the starter motor because we've got to do a little machining job, because we're using the Mazda gearbox, as you may remember on these. We've got to do a little machining job to allow for the nose of the starter motor to clear the gearbox, and we haven't done that machining on the mock-up gearbox, so we couldn't fit the starter motor. So Rich made a little cardboard mock-up of the starter motor and like taped it in place so that Matt's got a bit of an idea to work from of where the exhaust manifold sits. So that's where we're at with the Escorts. We'll go to Churchill via Autograss. I'm going to mention the Autograss. Covering again, I had a few questions last time about the Autograss car. That's mine. It's not a project we're building here. However, it is a project that I will, if people are interested, I can mention it. If they're not, just say in the comments. If you don't want to hear anything about it, just say it's not a Retropower project. It's my own project. So it's not really work related. However, if you want me to mention snippets of it as we go, then I'll do that if you're at all interested. But I would say, for anybody that knows nothing about Autograss, it's a funny old sport really. It's the biggest motorsport in the UK in terms of number of competitors by a country mile. I think there are somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 licence holders in the UK that are racing in Autograss every year. It can be the cheapest motorsport ever to get into. It's ridiculously cheap. You pay a licence fee. It's run by an organising body called NASA, the National Autograss Sport Association. If you go on their website, it tells you everything you need to know, or go on their Facebook page, that tells you everything you need to know about the sport really. Very, very simple rules really. It's a dirt oval race. It's racing on a natural surface. It's oval racing, quarter-mile oval. And it's racing on a natural surface. It'll usually start as grass at the beginning of the season for the first sort of hour of racing, because it's a field and it's a temporary track technically. So that's how that bit works. And there are a number of classes. There are 10 classes basically. There's further complication to that in that there's juniors classes and other things. Bear with me for a moment. But basically it's based on 10 classes. Class 1 is basically originally standard 1000cc minis. Now Micras and Cinquecentos are allowed to race in that class as well, and Toyota Yaris's are allowed as well. But basically standard, in inverted commas, 1000cc cars. Going all the way up to unlimited saloons in class 7, which is the sort of most off-the-wall sort of saloon car category, which is what this will be, which is a silhouette, rear-wheel drive, usually mid-engined. Well, basically it has to be mid-engine because it would be a class 3 if it wasn't. Basically unlimited. You can run multiple engines. There's a minimum 1400cc limit, no maximum. Do what you want. Basically, that's in that category. Most people will be either running a pair of fairly highly modified motorbike engines, usually a pair of big capacity Suzuki Hayabusa bike engines, or they would be running something like I'm going to be running in that, which is a Chevy LS3 V8 in the back. So it's a cracking motorsport, dirt cheap to get into. Join your local club, pay somewhere of the order of, I don't exactly know the licence fee at the minute, but somewhere between 60 and 70 quid a year to join your local club and get your race licence. You don't have to do anything to get your race licence, you just join and you get your race licence. And then basically buy a car, get it scrutineered, make sure it's tagged. You have to get a scrutineer's tag on it to make sure that the roll cage is safe and everything. And then turn up at your local club and have a race. And it's as simple as that. You turn up on the day, you pay the same to get into the meeting on the gate as the people who go to watch do. Again, it varies somewhere between 5 quid and 20 quid on the gate. Big meetings it might be 20 quid, but most of the club meetings it's between 5 and 10 quid. You pay that on the gate, turn up, race. Great fun for the whole family. Juniors can start racing at, I'm going to be corrected on this now because I believe it's changed. It used to be the age of 12. I believe now they may be able to start at 10. Again, I'm slightly out of touch because I haven't raced for a few years. But in juniors, which are the class 1s or junior specials, I believe you can now start racing at 10, but double check that. I think it's either 10 or 12. And you can race in that through until you get to the adult classes, which you can start at 16. So, brilliant fun. I raced years ago. I've had a big break because we set up a car business, and now I'm going to go back and have another crack. So that's what that's all about. So pardon the diversion, but that's what that's all about. But look it up, National Autograss. Here we come to the Churchill Jaguar. I'm not going to open the door and point at the bits. Well, I can try, but I think Jamie might struggle to get in. But he's got lots of footage, so I'll just explain it. And Jamie's got abundant footage. Basically, Stu's been working on making the seat mountings for the car, which are quite technical. Basically, to fit the seats, there's bits in the way in all the wrong places, and it's awkward for all the wrong reasons. In that the rear seat mount ended up almost directly in the plane of the floor pan, the existing floor pan at the back, and the front mount ends up above a hollow section that basically means you can't access the bolts at all for the front seat mount. So we drew up on CAD and CNC cut the seat mounting boxes that Stu had designed. He did a cardboard design first, then we made sure that would all fit, drew them on CAD, CNC cut them, folded them, and they fit so that he's got little weld flanges that sit between all the ribs on the floor, and it all just sits nicely onto the structure that's there without hitting everything and being a mess when it's in place, basically. It all ends up a nice tidy job and feeds the forces in neatly to the surroundings. And then he's made some sections from 4mm thick steel that go across, bolt to the seat runners either side, have a 90-degree fold on the end, and then enable the front seat mountings to be a bolt going through transversely and putting the mount into shear. Because there's no way we can get a vertical bolt in for the front part of the seat mount and actually keep it accessible. So he's made all that. That's worked really, really well, and very neat solution. At the back, where the bolt ended up more or less in the seat plane, what he's done is he's fabricated a little well that basically mounts into the floor from underneath and gives access to the underside of the seat mounting box from under the car, and then that bolts up from underneath. So again, a very neat solution to what was actually quite a tricky problem, where basically the bolts just being in the wrong places, which is a thing you find quite a lot when working with relatively small cars. I know a Mark II Jaguar isn't a small car, but compared to a lot of modern cars it is, and there's actually not a lot of interior space in them, and that's where we always run into problems. Particularly the car that springs to mind on that really is the Morris. That was horrendous in terms of interior space. There's just no room for anything. Getting at every bolt is pretty much a challenge on that. Anyway, once you've done the seat mounts, moved on to back to the dash area, and getting on with the HVAC mounting. Which reminds me, that was another job that was being done on the Escorts that I was doing. But I'll flip back to that in a sec. But yeah, he's got on to mounting the heater unit, which is a Vintage Air Magnum unit, which has an internal paddle controlling the air split between the heater and the aircon matrices, so that the switching between heat and cool, or mix of the two for demist, is almost instantaneous. It's all servo motor controlled as well, no manual flaps, all servo motor controlled, and it's got a little temperature control ECU on it as well. It's really, really nice system. The downside of it is it's really big and it's only really designed for left-hand drive cars. Now on this particular car, it's not really a problem because this is left-hand drive, so it's not too much of an issue on this. On the Escort, it's a bit more of an issue because they're right-hand drive. But yeah, Stu's made the brackets to attach the heater unit up to the bulkhead structure, and then and to the tube structure that's going to be supporting the new dash. So he's got all that bracketed in and worked out how to get the pipe access to it, which is quite challenging, and what bends we're going to need on what pipes to get everything to fit. So he's got that all in place, and also worked out the ductwork runs to make sure that's all going to work. Flitting back to my little work on the Escort, I'd spend a bit of time prototyping a part so that I can do two off, and again all the bits are drawn, so because I've got two of them to do. Similar sort of challenge as this, apart from the fact that it's in a right-hand drive car. So the heater's kind of the wrong way around, so you're mounting it backwards, which just sort of makes a few things a little bit more difficult. But we've got that. I've made the mountings to fit that to the closure plate that bolts now to the back of the heater bubble. We've made that an unboltable plate so that we can paint inside the heater bubble, and the HVAC unit's carried, the bulk of the weight of it is carried on that bolted plate. And it means then that the air intake, which comes from that plate directly into the fan, is also part of the whole unit when it's all bolted in. Keeps it all sort of unitary. And then the only other mounting from the heater will be the rearward one, the one nearest to the passengers, which will mount to the lower dash tube in the Escort. That'll be the second mount for that heater unit, will be to the dash tube. So I've got to wait for the other car to come back, because obviously that one's had the dash done, this one hasn't yet. So I've been doing the other mock-up in this car. But the next phase of bracketing will need the first car to be back from Simpson exhaust so that I can do the bracketry to the dash tube. And then we've also got to do some modification to the dash tube on that to allow the steer, because the steering column height has ended up interfering with the dash tube a little bit, so we've got to do a bit of a modification there as well. But that's pretty much where we're at on Churchill Jaguar and on the two Escorts. So at that point, we move on to the E-Type Jag, which is in here, but it's in there's various other things occurring in here. We're doing the final polish and settling of the Stratos parts prior to that being put together again for the final time, following the IVA and following various bits of stone chip damage and things that we had to sort out on the rear clam, and various other bits of work involved with the rear window area, the modifications we've done for the rear window area. So we've done some repaint work on that, and we're doing some polishing work just to make sure that everything's right before it goes on the car for the final time. For the umpteenth time, but final time. And then in the background, now looking a bit sorry for itself there, because we're at the flatting the clear coat stage, is the E-Type body and the E-Type bonnet, which we've not moved on to flatting that yet. Just a few little bit. We wet flat all clear coat, so it doesn't really matter sort of whether it comes out well or badly at the point of applying the clear coat. It's all wet flatted anyway. That actually came out extremely well. It's not being flatted from the point of view of poor finish anywhere. There's inevitably the odd piece of dirt in it. We get that anyway. It's almost impossible to prevent that unless you've got a car manufacturer's paint line, and even then still happens. But other than that, yeah, pretty much perfect finish. But that's being flatted now. The colour, correction on previous mispronunciations and misrememberings, is it's actually a Porsche colour. It's Porsche Gentian Blue. So that's all now finished. Gaz has done the final base coat and clear coat on that, and all the front end assembly has been base and clear coated as well, so all that lot's ready to go together. So the main body will be wet flatted and polished. Then the front frame will be fitted to the body with a new set of bolts. We've got bolts we've been using for mock-up that'll have new bolts fitted, all be fitted to the front end of the body tub, and then that will stay on its trolley with the front end fitted and go round to the assembly shop. We won't be putting the bonnet on. The bonnet's going to live on its little trolley until the engine bay is built, because the bonnet will need adjustment once the engine is in. The front frame and bonnet will need adjustment to get the closure right, because the car actually flexes a little bit when the engine's fitted. But more pertinently, the bonnet will need to come off when fitting the engine. So there's no point whatsoever fitting it to the car just to take it off again, because it's not a particularly pleasant task. So that's going to stay on its little trolley and wheel around with the car, sort of stay by its side or in front of it, but not actually be fitted until we're actually at the stage of having the engine bay built to the point where the bonnet can go on and stay on. So that's pretty much where we're at on that. As I say, these parts will be going back onto the Stratos very imminently, really, just a bit later this morning. I think that pretty much sums up where we're at this week.
And now for something completely different.